All right, so today we're going to start with, let's see, once we get, there's like 6 or 7 people that are joining here at the last minute. This isn't the rules of golf discussion, so we can't penalize them 2 strokes for being late, but we'll let them join on. So, all right, so we're going to talk briefly about elevation. Elevation is something that is we look at it from a course rating perspective in 2 different scenarios. So we're looking at it from tee to green, and then we're looking at it also in the middle of the hole under topography. But as elevation, as it's mentioned here in number 3, as part of the effective plane length corrections, we're looking at it from tee to green. So this is going to be gathered by the measuring team. Usually it's the captain that gets this, and we use Google Earth or some other different forms of or tools to get this elevation, but it'll be on your form 1. So when you look at a form 1 that you get when you show up and we hand it to you, it'll be listed here in this tee to green elevation, and it'll be provided for you. And the one thing we do ask is that you do just spot check it to make sure that the minuses and pluses are correct, because that can make a big difference. Okay. All right. And so, yeah, so spot check that. That sometimes gets mixed up. Usually, if the number's on here, unless it looks really, really off, I would take it as gospel and just know that the captain used Google Earth to get this data. But there might be certain times where the captain may ask you to check on it, because it could have been a little bit challenging to get the information, whether it was some overhanging trees, or maybe at the time you weren't sure the exact spot on the tee where the tee was going to be located. But typically that information will be provided for you. And in terms of when we're putting that information, when that information gets on the sheet, it is rounded to the nearest 10. So here are a couple examples here. If it's 8 feet uphill or downhill, the elevation will be listed as 0. If it's 15 feet, the elevation will be 20. If it's 13 feet, it'll be rounded down to 10. So obviously there's going to be, it's not always perfect 10, but on the form it will be, and that's when we enter the data in the system, they come out as perfect 10s. And again, this elevation that we're looking at here is specifically tee to green. Okay. So the other elevation that we'll talk about in our topography is when we're looking at our approach shot to the green, and that will be evaluated by the rater. But this will be done ahead of time. And then the last thing, just for your knowledge, not really important because again it'll be on the sheet, but on a par 3 hole, the max elevation is plus or minus 40 feet. And even though it may be more or less. So if we had a par 3 that was severely downhill, it could be minus 80 feet, but on the form it'll say minus 40. All right, and then one other thing that I didn't have in here because it doesn't apply, and we've talked about this before, but there's another effective plane length correction that it's number 5, and it's altitude. And that one we don't worry about here in Michigan because all of our courses are under the threshold of any adjustment there. Yep. So there's a question, good question. Why is 8 not rounded up to 10? So basically, it needs to be what we're saying is that the threshold is 10 feet or more, and then after 10 feet, it gets rounded. Based on where it's closest to. If it's 13, it's down. If it's 15, it's up. But it needs to be at least 10 feet to say that it's significant enough for us to be able to put it in the system. All right, so wind here, this is something that is done kind of internally, and we've we've tried to implement how it's listed in the table in the past, and my predecessor, Gene Myers, was out when she put it in, there was a lot of weird things that came out. Ratings came out at higher. So we've kind of come to three levels of wind, but we're reevaluating that based on some information that Hunter has gathered. So Hunter's put together this map, and Hunter, if you want to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, so I had a chance to talk to one of the meteorologists at the National Weather Service and basically get a link to some data from the Midwest Climatology Center to get specific wind data that matches the description that is within the course rating manual and the course rating guide. So we have to try our best to evaluate the average daytime wind speed during the mid-season, which it's very difficult to find the data if you don't have a connection basically to get you the data. So that's why I went to them. And so they were able to get me access to the data during the daytime hours from May 15 to September 15, which is what they consider to be probably the most accurate for our purposes. And then I was able to turn that into, I was able to geocode that data into a vector file. This is GIS talk, so I'm sorry if I'm speaking over anybody. And then put it into a GIS application such as this, where it's a dynamic map that will be able to, you'll be able to, for example, Kyle, if you want, you see the little search bar at the top. So if you type in any golf course name, you'll be able to type in, you have to type in golf after it because it's every.
Try something else.
Yeah, try something else. Sometimes you may actually have to type in the actual address. And Lori, we're gonna have the link ready here in a little bit. I still need to make some minor adjustments. But you can type in an address, or you can type in a golf course name. So if you type in, let's say, Washtenaw Golf Club, I know that one comes up.
If I could type, there we go.
Yep. And then you click on it, it'll actually search where it's at. And then if you click right alongside of it, like just outside the box, right there, it'll show up the city location attributes. And then if you click the arrow to the right of one of two up at the top, it'll actually take you and it'll show you exactly what the base wind speed is for that particular location. So it's kind of cool. I know that some of the geocoded service with Esri doesn't have some of the actual golf course names in it, but it'll be something that I would say probably at least 80 to 90% of the ones I tried, it came up with a name. So it's cool. It has the data, and we're going to keep inputting more data into it to make it more precise. But that's about it with that.
Yeah, this is great, and something that we'll definitely be able to get a little bit more accurate numbers. And I think there's also some adjustments that will be made. I know, Hunter, you were talking about this in terms of, if a course is heavily wooded, this number might get downgraded a little bit, as opposed to a course that might be open, where we might even increase it a little bit depending on the characteristics of the golf course.
Yeah, absolutely. There will be adjustments for woodedness of the course. I guess woodedness is a kind of a word in this application. And then also there will be a shoreline adjustment, because the closer you get to the shoreline, the smaller the differentials are. So the shoreline locations have a more generalized wind for the entire of the 6 mile stretch inland or whatever. So I've collected the data, and I have that I just need to find a way to get it into the map so that the shorelines populate correctly. But
cool. All right. So that is wind. And again, this is something that we kind of handle internally at the GAM office. It's really not anything. It's just a number that we put in the system at the end of the day that helps spit out the course rating and the slope rating. But in the past, without this specific data, we've used wind turbine maps. We've made kind of adjustments to courses that are windier based on those locations. And then as well as you have some coastal courses and things like that. We also ask the golf shop or the people that are there, if we might be there on a really windy day, we might ask them, is this kind of normal? Is this out of the ordinary? To get some anecdotal evidence as well to help with that. All right, so now we're going to move into obstacles as part of our learning here. So again, just a couple things about obstacles. We talked about this at the beginning, but an obstacle is going to be rated anywhere from 0 to 10, and just a couple of generic things. A rating of 0 should be assigned only when the obstacle does not exist on the hole. And so there are a couple criteria that would basically qualify an obstacle to not exist. But generally speaking, if it's within 50 yards of the line of play, throughout the play of the hole, it's going to get an obstacle or a value of at least 1. And then an average obstacle is 4, but the 3, 4, and 5 ratings that we come up with are expected about half the time on an average course. And then a rating of 10 would normally be expected on less than 1% of the holes. So you won't see a ton of 10s on your sheets if you're doing a really challenging golf course or maybe a longer set of tees. You might be more inclined to see those, but typically we're only going to see those very, very few times throughout the year. And then there are a couple obstacles that can't be 0. There's minimum values, and we talked about some of those already, and we'll talk about a few more of those today. And then again, when we're looking at these obstacles, a lot of this is kind of built into the tables that we'll see and that you'll see in the book, but we're looking at the likelihood of the obstacle coming into play, as well as the difficulty of recovering from the obstacle. And then here's just a general kind of summary of the values and kind of what the numbers mean typically. And there's an example here at the bottom. It says if a par 4 hole with formidable bunkers in the landing zone requires a long approach shot to a small green surrounded by deep bunkers, the bunker rating value should be in the 7 to 10 range because it is of extreme significance. And typically when we get to the charts, our data that we collect out there and our distances that we collect are going to get us to that value, plus adjustments that we may have out there. So our first obstacle we'll talk about is topography. So topography, generally speaking, it's the evaluation of the impact of terrain on play. And topography is a factor only if slopes and mounds in the fairway landing zones affect stance or lie. If we have things that are outside the fairway, so in the rough or left or the right of the fairway, those are going to be impacted in a different obstacle that we'll talk about later, recoverability in rough. And then we're also looking at the shot to the green if it's uphill or downhill. So at the very simplest example, we have a par 3 where we don't need to worry about the slopes and mounds in the landing zone because we don't have a landing zone. We're making the assumption that all tees are perfectly flat and level, although we know that's maybe not necessarily the case with some new tees that get put in, but that's the assumption that we're making. So on a par 3 or a 1-shot hole, we're basically starting off and we're really only looking at if the shot is uphill or downhill. And on a par 3 for our form 1 that you'll get, that elevation tee to green will be provided for you. So you can see here, this hole 3, we already have the elevation, it's minus 30 feet. And we know that, so then we would go to our chart. If just using this one as an example, if we know it's minus 30, we would go to our chart for topography. And we have a section here for par threes. And if it's minus 30, uphill or downhill, doesn't matter in terms of the number that we put on the sheet, but our value is going to be a 3 here. So in our form 1, we'd go back to our form 1 and we'd write under topography here, we'd write a 3. That's not a great number, but and then for the bogey player, we also have a 3 as well, because their shot, this is a male, so bogey player male hits a 200, so they're going to get to the green, so they're going to have a 3 as well. So par 3 topography is something that you can do really before you get out there. I would still write it in pencil, because there could be scenarios where it might not end up being a par 3 hole if you have a dog leg or a forced layup or something like that. But generally speaking, especially if the hole is nowhere near a par 4 length, you can go and do these before you even head out, because those are just simple lookups from the table. Okay, on a 2-shot hole or more, it's a little bit different. We're going to have not only the par 3 example where we have our landing or our approach shot to the green, but we're also going to have landing zones between the tee and when we get to the green. So when we're looking at a 2-shot hole, for example, we're gonna look at the approach shot as well as a landing zone, and we're gonna have a value there. So oops, it looks like, all right, I think they muted themselves. And then it gets a little bit trickier, but here in this case here, when we have just a 2-shot hole, we're looking at uphill and downhill from our approach shot, but we're also looking at the stance and lie there, because we're not on a teeing ground. We're in an area that could be curvy or wavy or hilly in the fairway, so we need to evaluate that. So in our chart, that's going to get us, when we're going beyond a par 3, we're going to get into this stance and lie section here, as well as our change in elevation from our approach shot to the green. So we're going to do both there. And then when we have a 3-shot hole or more, for certain golfers, it might take them more than 3 shots to get there, based on how far they hit it, based on those distances that we talked about at the very beginning. We're going to be evaluating multiple spots, but when we do evaluate multiple spots, it's important here for shots from landing zone to landing zone. So if we have a par 5, our second shot to our third shot, we're assuming that when we go to landing zone to landing zone, we're assuming that the elevation for that one is almost level with the fairway, and we rate topography based on stance or lie difficulty only. So if we look at our chart for that, that means essentially what we're saying is that we're going to stay for the shot that doesn't reach the green. We're going to go landing zone to landing zone. We're saying that it's going to be almost level with the fairway, even if it might be 20 feet uphill or 20 feet downhill to that next landing zone. We're just assuming that it's not, and we're going to evaluate only for stance and lie. But when we do have multiple shots that we're looking at, so 3 or more shot hole, we're going to rate each one of the shots, and then we're going to pick the higher rating value. So for example, if we look at our chart, on our first landing zone to our second landing zone, we're almost level with the fairway, and it might be moderately awkward, right? So we have a value of 3. But then on the next one, our approach shot to the green, we might be uphill 40 feet, but it might just be a minor problem. And so in that case, we'd have a value of a 5 here, and then a value of a 3. And in that case, which we do for a lot of obstacles, we will take the higher value. So on our Form 1, if we had that, we would write down a 5 and not a 3, because we're going to take the higher value there. All right, so we talked about, generally speaking, just general values, and we're talking about minor problem, minor to moderate, all these things. What does that mean? I wish I had a perfect answer for you. Topography is one of the obstacles that is a little bit more subjective than others. We're evaluating minor problem, minor to moderate, all the way over to extremely awkward. So one kind of rule of thumb that I like to use when I'm evaluating is I like to think of it in terms of, if I take a stance in the area, is it going to impact the direction that I aim, the location where I put the ball? Am I going to have to move it up in my stance, back in my stance? These are things that I look at to go down the scale from minor problem to extremely awkward. And then the other thing to keep in mind when we're evaluating these landing zones, we have a landing zone, right, that's 20 yards wide when we're in the fairway. And we have to keep in mind that we're looking at an average of that landing zone. So there's going to be places where it might be significantly awkward, but then within that 20-yard window, there might be places that are minor problem. So we're taking kind of the average of those, or where the majority of the balls are going to be, if there might be a feature that would funnel balls to a certain location. So we're not looking at necessarily the easiest obstacle that we encounter, and we're not looking at the hardest situation that we encounter. We're looking at an average over the course of that 20-yard landing zone. Okay, and the nice thing about topography is that we don't have any adjustments. You'll see some of the other obstacles that we talk about will have a ton of adjustments that we need to worry about. For topography, there isn't any. So we're just evaluating the minor problem to extremely awkward problem scenario on a 2 or more shot hole. All right, so let's just go through a couple examples here in the Form 1 so you can kind of see what it looks like. The other thing too I didn't mention is, when you're looking at this chart here, this is a lot of the charts in the book. There are some differences sometimes between men and women. This one here, we don't have a difference between men and women. It's the same chart. Other charts you'll see when we get to Fairway will have a different column for men versus women. But this chart is just universal. It applies to everyone. So when we get to our Form 1 here, we have a section topography here where we're going to put our information. So let's just say we're doing the second hole here. It's a par 4. So we're going to have an evaluation in our landing zone of the stance and lie as well as the elevation. Okay, so let's just assume for our intents and purposes that we see here it's tee to green is -10. So we're just going to assume that -10 is all in the approach shot. So when we're on our Form 1, we're going to write here in this elevation change / stance and lie, we're going to write -10. And then when we're evaluating the stance and lie, we're going to do a slash here and then write a code for, we can go back to our chart, we look at minor problem, minor to moderate, etc. So I'm just going to write something in here, and then we'll go back and get the number. But if I have a minor to moderate problem, so maybe nothing significant, but a little bit beyond, a minor problem. See, I think he muted himself. No, he didn't. All right, now I mute him. All right, so we've got -10 and a minor to moderate problem. That's what that MM stands for. And when we go back and look at our at our chart, we see that a -10 and a minor to moderate problem is going to get us to a value of 3 here. So that's what we'll put on our sheet. And when you're writing these codes down, typically minor problem is going to be an MP. This one's going to be an MM. You'll see an MA, SA, and EA on there. And that's really for you to write down so that you can get the correct number. And just to make sure for the captain that you evaluated it and that we got the right number on the sheet. So again, we got -10 here. That's our elevation, and then minor to moderate is going to get us a value of 3. So we'll go back to our form 1, and then in this spot here, we'll write a 3. And then we'll do the same for the bogey, because keep in mind that the bogey and the scratch player have different landing zones. So you're in a lot of cases, you could have different values for bogey and scratch. If you've got a pancake of a golf course and it's super flat, it's going to be, a minor problem for everyone. But in some cases, depending on the landing zone, you might have different evaluations there. And then again, we went through the example of the par 3 where we are looking only at the elevation. So those ones are simple. If we do have a hole, and unfortunately we don't have one here, but if we did have a par 3 hole that was a par 3 for the scratch player, but not for the bogey player, then we would, when we're looking at our chart here, we would apply the par 3 application for the scratch player and the 2-shot hole application for the bogey player. So you might have a par 3 hole that's completely flat, and that will get you a value of 0 for the scratch player. But for the bogey player, because they can't reach the green, they might have a minor to moderate problem or a minor problem, and it'll be a value of 1 or 2 or whatever you award for them. So just to use like a concrete example of that, if you're rating the female golfer, so the scratch player hits at 210, the bogey player hits at 150. So if you have a 170 yard hole for a female, the scratch player gets there no problem, but the bogey player doesn't. So the scratch player would have the par 3 evaluation, and the bogey player would get the par 4, the 2-shot hole evaluation, which includes not only elevation, but also stance and lie issues as well. Yeah, so there's a good question. If you're not sure between the 2 ratings, moderately awkward and significantly awkward, would you typically go to the lower one? I think generally speaking that's probably a good rule of thumb. But I think the other thing that you can do is if you have a similar situation a couple holes later, you might rate one with the moderately awkward, and then the next one with the significantly awkward to balance it out. But generally speaking, if it's better to be a little bit more conservative when it comes to this. And the other thing we have to keep in mind too is that we're rating golf courses here in Michigan, and we're trying to be consistent across the state. But the same concept is being applied across the world. So what might be moderately awkward for the golf course that you're at might not necessarily be moderately awkward in the grand scheme of things if you look at all the different types. So I think, for at least based on my experience, the more courses you do, the more courses you see, the more areas that you rate in, the better off you'll be able to understand topography, because you'll have other examples to think about. Well, in relation to this course, it's not that challenging, or is that challenging? So I think it's something that you get better with over time as you do more of them. Yeah, there's a question about on multiple shot holes. So on the Form 1, recording it on a multiple shot hole, there's really not a way to do it, unfortunately, because we're at limited space here. So if you did have two different things, you might write them down here at the bottom in the section here. Typically what I do is, because on that if you have a par 5 or three or more shot hole, that first evaluation that you're making, it's just the stance and lie. It's not elevation, because when we go from landing zone to landing zone, we say it's level. So I just keep that in mind, that hey, this is, right now on the hole, this is moderately awkward. And then I just keep that in mind. You could also write it down at the bottom. I'm not sure if there are other people, if they have a system or what they do, but I don't know. I'll let anyone else chime in if they have a different way that they do it. So yeah, unfortunately, there's not a space for both, but eventually the number that you put, or the symbol that you put down here, is going to be the one that actually gets to your final number. So whatever landing zone you end up doing, that's the one that you'll want to put in here.
Kyle, it helps to have an eraser.
Yeah.
You have a rating tool that doesn't have an eraser, it's a bad tool.
Yeah.
You can just jot it down, jot that initial one down, and then if your opinion changes once you've incorporated elevation and so forth on the final shot, then you can always erase or adjust or whatever. But you don't want to lose track of what the stance or lie was on the original landing zone.
Yeah, that's a great point. You could, you could literally write down that first one there, and then when you get to the second landing zone, if the number is going to be higher, you can just erase it and write on top of it there. That would be one way to do it for sure. All right. So the other thing, last thing I'll say about topography and then the Form 1 here, is just make sure that when you are writing these -10 and and things like that, that you make sure you get it in the right box. I can't tell you how many times this shows up in forced layup or dog leg, and it just causes some confusion, because those forced layups and dog legs are really important. So just make sure, if you do put it on there, that you're writing it in the right spot, or that you at least put the or MP or SA or whatever after, so I know it's not, or we know it's not a forced layup or a dog leg if it happened to be in the wrong box. All right. All right, so we're gonna move on to fairway here. If anyone has any questions, speak now, but we'll move on to fairway unless I hear from someone here. All right, so when we're looking at fairway here, again, when we're evaluating this, we just talked about landing zones before, but when our landing zone is this 20-yard area here where our ball first hits the ground and rolls out to. So when we're looking at fairway here, we're evaluating this entire 20-yard area. There are going to be times where it's perfectly, linear, and there's not little curves and things like that like we have in this picture, and there's other times that there will be, and we'll talk about what we do in those cases in a little bit here. But when we're evaluating the fairway, we're looking, again, it's at how long the hole is important. We're looking at how wide the fairways are, which is extremely important. And then if there's nearby obstacles, maybe it's trees, it could be penalty area or punitive rough, that would make that shot more challenging. And so when we are measuring fairways, if we do have contour cut fairways, which is what this picture is, we have shapes and it's not perfectly straight. We're just going to take the average of those areas. So here, obviously, it's a little bit wider than it is here. So you might just take the line right here, which is close to an average, and shoot it there. Or you could, if you want, you can shoot it here and get 30 and then shoot it here and get 20, or you could just shoot it here and get 25. I'd prefer to take less measurements and just kind of estimate where the middle is going to be, but either way works and we'll get you to the same value. Oops. And then here's something that I don't probably do right, but it is in the book, and I think it's just a good reminder of reading and the importance of that. But when the fairway is reduced by a punitive obstacle, so again, the definition of punitive is an obstacle or situation that is unusually difficult, often requiring a demanding recovery shot or likely to cost the player a stroke. If that is at the end of the landing zone, we'll kind of use the average approach where we're saying that just like we have in this, maybe this is a deep bunker instead of just a rough cutout. We might, in this case here, it's not necessarily at the end. So what we do in this case is we would use the narrow width at the beginning of the landing zone if that was the case. So essentially what we're looking at, we're typically looking at averages if we have contoured or fairways that aren't perfectly straight, but in some cases, if we have a punitive obstacle, we'll use the very narrow value at the beginning if it happens to come in the beginning. And the logic behind that is because the ball is hitting the ground in that area, and so it's more likely to come into play than one maybe towards the end of the landing zone. All right, and then one thing that does come up, I wouldn't say a lot, but probably 1 out of every 3 rates typically, maybe not that often, but you'll definitely encounter it. If you do 5 rates this year, you'll definitely see it once, I would imagine. But sometimes the courses will have a intermediate cut, so kind of that second cut before you get to the deep rough. The book tells us to count half of that. So the easiest way to do that is just to stand on the edge of the intermediate cut and the rough on one side of the fairway and shoot with your rangefinder across the other side. So I guess I probably should have started with that, but we're measuring this with rangefinders. Those of you that have done it know, but again, we're just standing on one edge and shooting to the other to get the distance. Sometimes you can stand in the middle and shoot left and right. And that might be done in some cases, but typically it's easier just to shoot from one side to the other. You are going to run into courses where it's going to be difficult to determine the edge of the fairway. So you might need to go on the side of the fairway that is most or hardest to recognize and then shoot to the one that is. Or you might have slopes that you can't necessarily see the edge. So you might have to go into the middle and measure left and right in those cases. And then the last thing in terms of on this page here for fairway, we do not, if it's a par 3 hole, we do not have a fairway rating. So the one thing that's a little bit tricky that's different than topography we talked about is that for par 3 holes, the par is determined based on the scratch player's length. So in this case here, even though it might be a 2-shot hole for a bogey player, it's still going to stay as a par 3, and the fairway value will still be 0 for the bogey player. So for the form, if we look at our form 1, you'll see that they're pre-populated with zeros here in this fairway section. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people do this, cross out this value and write, if it's 33 yards, they'll write 33 in here, and then they'll look up the value and write in a 4 here or whatever it would be. That's not right. If it's a par 3 hole, the fairway value is 0. right? Regardless of if the bogey player can't get there. The only time that you would cross these numbers out, and you would do it for both, is if this hole somehow couldn't be played as a par 3 because of a dog leg or a forced layup or something like that. So if it says 0 on the sheet, leave it as 0 unless you're changing the par for both the scratch and the bogey player. And you won't get that or understand that really until you probably rated for a couple years. So if you didn't get what I said, don't worry about it. Just if you see zeros on there, leave it on there unless someone tells you to change it. All right. So we talked about different, averaging techniques and things like that. Again, we talked about in one of our first sessions, when we are getting to our landing zone and looking at this, I typically will go to the middle of the landing zone. So if my sheet says I need to be at 150, I'm going to go to the 160 area and kind of stand there and look 10 yards left and 10 yards right to evaluate my landing zone, which is that 20-yard window there. Some people will go to the exact spot. It doesn't really matter where you go to. Just understand that that landing zone is 20 yards. So if your sheet says 150, the landing zone really starts at 170 and goes to 150. All right, so we do have a handful of adjustments here. So you can see that below we do have some adjustments, but this chart here is a single chart, but it does have a side for men and a side for women. So just keep in mind what gender you're doing when you're rating, because that's the side you're gonna start on, excuse me. But the lookup here is pretty simple. You're starting with the length of the hole, and then you're gonna go to the width of the fairway here that you measured and get your value. So if we have a width of, let's just go through a couple of examples on the form 1 here. So if we have let's start with the 2-shot hole. If we have 350 and we measure at 100, or sorry, at 150, we'll start with our bogey player. We measure the fairway to be 27. Okay, and then we go to the scratch player, and our measurement here is 37. So we just need to keep in mind we got 350 as our hole length, and it's men. So 350 men. Too many charts here. So 350 for men is going to fall into the second row, and for the value of 27, that's going to get us a value of 3, and then the 37 value is going to get us a final table value of 2. So then on our form 1, we've got a 2 and a 3, assuming that there's no adjustments. We'll talk about those in a second, but if there's no adjustments, that's going to be our number. And then for a 3-shot hole or 3 or more shot hole, we might have multiple values. So we might have a 27 for our first one, and then our second landing zone, we might have a 31. And in this case here, we're going to look up both values and get the number, but we're going to take the higher number. And so you'll learn eventually that, if there aren't any adjustments, that obviously the value that's lowest, if you look at the chart, the value that's lowest is the one that's going to end up on your sheet. So in a lot of cases, if you do have a really low value right away when you're measuring fairways for your first landing zone, it's still good to measure the upcoming landing zones, because sometimes these adjustments can be shot specific, but typically if you have a really narrow landing zone, that one's going to be the one that ends up on the sheet. All right, so now let's talk about some of these adjustments and what they mean, what they are. We talked about the L adjustment or layup adjustment last week. That comes into play anytime that a golfer hits less than a full shot. So it could be because of a dog leg, or it could be because of a layup as well. Either one of those could trigger an L minus. Again, like we talked about last week, this L is shot specific. So on our form 1, we would put that L right next to the width of the fairway that we measured. And then we have others that are on here as well. Visible, or V, is, I'm just going to read it here because it's a couple things. It's that none of your landing zone is visible, so you can't see where you're hitting it, and it is difficult to determine the line of play. So you might have a hole where you can't see your landing zone, but because of the way the hole is carved out of trees, you can tell that it doglegs to the left, or it goes just straight away based on the trees. So in that case, you wouldn't have a V adjustment. But if you can't see your landing zone, and you don't, or it's difficult to determine the line of play, and then you would have that V adjustment. And a good rule of thumb that someone taught me when I was first doing this was, when you go out to your landing zone, the easiest way to determine right away if it's a V or not is just to look back at the tee. If you can still see the tee when you're in your landing zone, you can't have a visibility adjustment. And then if you can't, then you're going to go from there and determine if it's not, it's satisfied that first requirement, but then again, is it difficult can we determine the line of play even though we might not be able to see our landing zone? Another good example of that would be if you're playing, you might be playing a course that has, maybe a hill that goes down to a landing zone, but you can clearly see houses going left and right of the hole, and you know that the hole is straight because it's not going to turn into someone's backyard or anything like that. So in that case, you know the line of play even though you might not be able to see your landing zone. Another adjustment here is the W adjustment. In this case here, W can be both a positive or a negative. So when we talk about a positive adjustment, it's making it harder, more challenging. If it's a minus adjustment, it's making it easier. So you could have a W adjustment for if a dog leg makes the area that you're hitting your shot into, narrower, because you might not be able to roll it out completely, or it might be cut off by, a rough dog leg or bunker that is kind of on the dog leg or around the turn. You could have overhanging tree branches that impact your ball getting to parts of the fairway. It might be impossible to get to 5 or 10 yards of the fairway because of a tree that is blocking the ball to get there. The fairway could be tilted so that you might have to hit to the left or right in order to get the ball to stay in the fairway. And then there could be severe obstacles that closely border the landing zone that also might trigger a W adjustment. This was one that, for those experienced folks that I read, that was interesting. I didn't really think about it, but basically what it's saying here is that if you have a lateral measurement that's less than 10 yards because of that closely bordering definition, then you automatically have a W plus here, which I'm sure I had and didn't do in the past. So that was an interesting one from reading today or this morning. And then you can also have a W plus adjustment or a 2+ adjustment, and that's if the width of the fairway is effectively reduced when the majority of the fairway landing zone is tilted and balls are likely to end up in the rough. Doesn't happen a ton, but it can happen at certain places. And then on the minus side, or making it a little bit easier, you could actually have the fairway easier to hit if you have hills that kind of border it and might bounce the ball back into the fairway. So I think we've all played places where you have valleys, and if you bounce it off the valleys, they just funnel back into the fairway. That would be an example of one where you'd have that W minus. Another W minus, a little bit different, is if there's a narrow landing zone that causes a high table value where shots can easily be hit from the rough on one side as easily as those from the fairway. So, you might have a golf course that doesn't have a ton of obstacles left and right, and maybe just the rough is really low. It's 2-inch rough or 2.25 rough, and it's pretty sparse. If you miss the fairway, and you've got a 60-yard shot into the green, it's probably not as penal. So even if you had a 25-yard wide fairway, if missing the fairway to the left doesn't really make the shot much more challenging, you could have a W minus there. And then likewise, if it's on both sides, you could have a W minus minus. But when you're doing this, you have to keep in mind that there are things that would not allow us to have a W minus in those cases. So if you have bunkers, if you have trees that make that are going left and right of the hole, then obviously missing left and right in the rough is not the same. So you wouldn't have W minus adjustments in those cases. And then the last adjustment that we'll talk about is the U adjustment, and that's an unpleasant. And that is something that it says here, the lies are caused by poor turf conditions. And when we're rating a golf course, we are assuming this is going to last for 10 years. So over a 10-year window, we need to know that it's always unpleasant. And that's not going to be because of a recent rainstorm or, some recent weather event. It would be if the course is in a floodplain or something like that. And that's this part of the fairway. I think we did have one this year at Warren Valley, and one of the nines I was on, where it was just in an area that it was just always dead. And we talked to the course to confirm it. And they just told us, yeah, that area is always just the grass growth is very challenging, and it's not always in good condition. So we very rarely do it. I wouldn't put a U adjustments on there unless the captain, you talk with the captain, he or she, and they're good with it and okay with it. Because again, we're looking at it over a 10-year window, and just because you might have some bad grass growth for the day that you're there doesn't mean that it's always the case. If the hill is watered and has long grass, the ball will not bounce, but sink in, so not a W minus. Yep. So that's what Lori is talking about there, is you might have that kind of valley effect, but if the rough is thick and the ball doesn't bounce back to the fairway, you can't apply a W minus there, because you're assuming that the ball, it says here, and the balls will bounce back into the fairway. So if it's not going to get to the fairway, then we can't just automatically apply a W minus in those cases. All right. So let's see here. Let's go to Form 1. So again, just we'll just do like one or two of these, just so you can see kind of what they look like. But you might have a hole here where you've got you have your fairway width of 26, and you've got a W plus adjustment. And so here we'll just do this one. We're going to start with, again, we need to look at the hole length. So that's 395. And then we've got 26 and then a W plus. So if we go back to our chart, $395 for men is in this row here, the third column, and the 26 value is a 4. And then because we have that W adjustment, the 4 is going to turn into a 5. So on our Form 1, we would write in here value of 5. And again, even though there is this adjustment column here, I always like writing the adjustment value next to this length because it is shot specific. So that might be a row we can get back to add to somewhere else, but potentially, but I always include it right next to it because if in this case here, you actually would have two values because we have a 25 landing zone as well for this bogey player. So it might be, 33, but if you write the W plus here, you might mistakenly apply the 33 or apply the W plus to the 33 when it really should only apply to the 26 value. So don't write the adjustments there, write them next to the value that they apply to. All right. Any questions about Fairway? All right, do we want to run through green target? Let's why not? It shouldn't take too long for green target. We'll just talk about it for like a minute or two and then we'll end for the day. But green target is something that looks at the difficulty of hitting the green. It takes into consideration a lot of things: the green size, the approach shot length, surface visibility and firmness. And then we also have this concept of transition zone that we won't really get into. But when we look at our chart, we have, in this case here, we have two different charts, one for men, one for women. So the men is the blue and the women is the gold here. And essentially, we have kind of a multi-faceted chart here, which can be a little complicated, but we have our scratch player on the left and our bogey player on the right, just like we do in the Form 1. And then we have this effective diameter of the green, or effective green diameter. And then we have the shot length. So we won't get into any of these adjustments today, but I did want to kind of go through this briefly. And then one thing that's nice on the
Have you muted?
sorry, trying to find. All right. There it is. All right. So what we're looking at the effective green diameter and the approach shot length, and I just want to show you on the Form 1 kind of where those things are. So you can do a little bit of reading farther on your own if you'd like, but the effective green diameter is going to be taken care of by the measuring team, and that's going to be listed up here and in the top. And then your approach shot obviously is going to be listed here. And the nice thing that we have for the green target is that we have kind of a standard value that is given based on the chart. So it's not something we need to look up all the time, but we might have adjustments. So we talked about layups and dog legs where we changed our approach shot length. In that case, we would have a different approach shot length. So we need to go to the chart and look it up. We won't do that today, but if you do ever adjust your approach shot length, here you're going to have to re-look up your chart or your green target value. And then there's the other scenario that comes up is this concept of a TZ or a transition zone. So if you see this on your Form 1, you'll know that you have to look up the green target value. And so if you go to your chart, there at the bottom, there is a 50-50 transition zone rating value. And so when you see that on your sheet, 9 times out of 10, you're going to put this value down. We will cover transition zone at a different time because it's a complicated topic. But 9 times out of 10, you're just going to take, if you see that TZ on your form 1, you're going to go to this value here from the chart and throw it in there for your green target. All right. So we won't get into any of the adjustments, but I just wanted to cover that briefly. Then we can jump into the adjustments next week, and then go through a couple examples in the form 1 where we have changed approach shots and adjusted approach shots. So we will be Hunter's got the weekly quiz cooked up and ready to go. So I didn't get 100% this week because I was sloppy and didn't overlooked and didn't get a right table value. So just make sure you take your time when you're taking it. But again, it's just for your own benefit. We're not looking at the scores. We're not publishing them. So there's no downside to taking it, only upside. So take the quiz. You'll probably learn a few things. And if there's any questions, we'll stay on the line here for the next couple minutes. But again, appreciate everyone coming out today, and go Rams, go Matt Stafford. And if you like the Bengals, oh, hopefully it's a good game. But enjoy the Super Bowl, and we will see you next week. Mark, you look like you're like wanting to say something. No?
Nope.
All right.
Nope. Other than thought Hunter did a great job on the quiz. Not all tricked up and like a rating trivia thing. It was pretty straightforward and should build confidence rather than discourage people. So that I think he did a great job.
Just wait till this week. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So. Yeah, we will, Mark. We'll send you a tricked up quiz from the USGA. I think we're going to be sending that out to the captains here once they give us the go ahead. But that one is a little bit trickier and
Oh yeah,
requires some thoughtful reading. So
I did miserable on that.
Yeah.
What'd you say, Hunter?
I didn't do so hot. I mean, I got a majority of questions right, but that's all I'm going to say. It was really tripped out. They were trying to hide things almost. It was like hidden little phrases that could be interpreted different ways. So,
And as we talked on the training committee meeting, what is the purpose of that? You know, as opposed to trying to build competence and confidence rather than obscurities of, I don't know.
Yeah.
They do that with the rules test too.
Yeah, it's really just a tool to sort out, you know, who the good readers are versus the bad readers, and it really doesn't rate your intelligence per se or your ability to do it. It's just if you're a good reader or not. I mean, it's similar in school, right? I mean, some people are good test takers, and if they had to go out and apply the knowledge, they would be terrible at it, but they can ace the test. And luckily for me, for the majority of my life, I've just been a good tester and haven't had to worry about being proficient and doing anything else. So,
Yeah.
I was very careful in circling things that they would say in underlining, you know, all or some or never, or I think those are the things you have to look for on that test or that quiz from the USGA. You know, looking for the pertinent information and what's not, sifting through all the stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with it. I think the the frustrating part about that quiz is that those things would naturally come to you if you were on the course and you were looking at the hole that they were describing, and you went out there and you said, okay, like I see this and this and this, it comes to you very easily. But sometimes when you read it in a thing and you don't have an image behind it, it makes it so much more difficult to pick up on things, because I think as we become better raters out in the field, we learn how to pick up on things while we're physically on the golf course that you just can't do when you're just doing it by the book in text.
That was a good point about the image. I actually was drawing diagrams. I was drawing it out, when they were describing things to be to the left or the front or layups or whatever. I was actually drawing little things. So it would make sense to me visually.
So you are going to send that out to us?
Yeah, we're just waiting on, I need to get confirmation that it's okay. They're very, well, I can't use this word on TV, or on the camera, but they're very strict about sending certain things out. And, sometimes for good purpose, like these questions they may use as part of their, certification that they do. So they don't want the questions out there for people to be able to know the questions before the test type of thing.
More proprietary concerns.
Yeah, exactly. But I think they're, I think we'll be able to do it shortly here. I think they're just confirming that they're not going to use any of these questions for their calibration seminar that they're having. So, but
Got it. Well, it's not that I'm looking forward to taking it or anything. I'm happy with Hunter's little quizzes here. But
yeah,
it'll be good to do though.
Yeah, it'll be good to do, and we're gonna basically give it to the captains, and if you can't get 10 out of 20, then we're gonna fire you. So. No, I'm just kidding, but we won't even get the scores. I don't think we'll probably just send it out. I don't think we'll put it up for us to score, or maybe we will. I don't know what to see how they have that. I forget, because I think, Lori, didn't they had it like it was an electronic thing that gave you the answer, I think, right away, right? Or
at the end you submit it, and then they email you how you did.
Right. Yeah.
Huh.
I did well. I was so worried.
Yeah, no, it's there were a couple of tricky ones. There was one that I got wrong, that I disagreed with the way that they had it worded, but I just read more into it than I probably should have. So whatever, it's not the end of the world. So
No.
all right, any questions out there from the gallery? We're gonna probably shut it down here in the next minute or two if there's no one has any questions.
Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
Hunter's quizzes, are they on the website, on the GAM website, or are they going to be coming out as emails?
Yeah, so we'll put them up on the GAM website. We'll also email them out on Monday, but they'll be on the website prior to the email. So I think they'll probably be out there. Hunter, you'll know for sure, but
they're actually already up there. I just put them on there about 10 minutes before the meeting.
Oh. Okay. All
Yep.
right. Thank you.
No problem.
don't let Marv cheat off you.
I don't cheat.
Kyle, you're starting something here.
Keep that up. You're only gonna have one raider out of this house.
We'll see you next week. Thank you.
All right, sounds great.
Thanks, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
See ya.